musician traveling the world for gold. Some daddies made of plastic and some other things I love. Won't you come along with me? There's no time for rejection. Hold on tight, such a delight. It's Brian's Wrestling Collection. Me.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Brian Hardy and welcome to another episode of Brian's Wrestling Collection. And today here on the show, I decided to do something a little different. We're not looking at magazines or figures or t-shirts or hats or unboxing crates or anything like that. Today, I kind of took an idea from one of my friends from the show, The New 80s Revolution, Jason Nupp. So I'm going to give a shout out to Jason right now. What's up, my brother from New York? And I'm just going to take a page out of Jason's book today and basically talk to you about how I fell in love with wrestling, if I got out of wrestling at any point in time, and what things are like nowadays. So let's get started on the show. Here we go. Breaking that seal on that Pure Leaf lemon tea. I was having trouble deciding if I was going to do a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee, if I was going to do Pabst Blue Ribbon, if I was going to do some watermelon sangria, or if I was going to do this Pure Leaf tea. And I chose the Pure Leaf tea today. So basically, I was sitting on the couch right here last night and in my living room, and I was watching the New 80s Revolution. And Jason Nupp, who was one of my close friends, decided to talk about, what was the thing that originally, what was his earliest memories, I guess, of pro wrestling, into what made him fall out of love with wrestling and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, that's a great episode to do. And I've never really done anything like that to explain to people how I fell in love with wrestling or what I liked about it or what I didn't like about it. I don't usually get into all that kind of stuff. I just like unbox things and show different, stuff. So I was like, this would be a cool episode to do to complement his page. So honestly, go follow the New 80s Revolution right now on YouTube. Subscribe to that channel and give Jason a shout. And good stuff. But I mean, I encourage everyone that is in our little wrestling community to honestly, especially YouTubers and stuff like that, share your story, because I'm going to share my story right now and I think it's a good one. Okay, so as long as I can remember, pretty much, I don't, it's weird. People, will say, oh, I remember this or I remember that. For me, I don't ever remember a time where there wasn't pro wrestling in my life. The weirdest thing is, like most kids, I mean, I've been quoted in newspapers saying this kind of stuff. Most kids grew up, with a pacifier or with this or that. I remember chewing on like a Hulk Hogan LJN figure and a Hasbro figure, stuff like that. My original memories of pro wrestling, as far as dating back to like being a child, like I said, I just don't ever remember a time that pro wrestling wasn't in the picture as a younger child. The AWA figures, the Remco figures and stuff, I had a brother who was 6 years older than me, and he had all this different stuff that my dad had bought him. And as far as like Remco figures, I don't remember ever having like any of the Remco figures except like Larry Zbyszko, Rick Martel, and the Road Warriors. And I remember the Road Warriors more so out of any of them. Didn't have the chaps, didn't have the the collars or anything like that. It was strictly just the figures of the Road Warriors AWA Remco figures. I remember that as a kid. I remember as a little kid, and I'm talking like being 2 years old, I remember having Don Morocco. I remember having Superfly Jimmy Snuka, Big John Studd, Hulk Hogan, and a few other LJN figures. And when I say a few other, I mean I probably had every single one, but at the time, none of those mattered to me. Like it was literally just like Hogan, Superfly Snuka, Don Morocco. And I used to actually play, like long before I even knew that the Don Morocco and Superfly Snuka cage match existed, because I didn't find out about that till I was about 13, 14 years old. I used to actually take a clothes basket and tip it upside down so it looked like a cage, and I would literally have Superfly Snuka come off of the cage onto Don Morocco and stuff like that. And talk about foreshadowing at its finest. I had never seen it at that age or anything like that, so it's kind of crazy. Hasbro figures. I grew up, the two Hasbro figures I remember the most as a child, more than anything, was Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. I had Hasbro figures, ton of Hasbro figures. I had Demolition. I had the most memorable Hogan one. I mean, I had all of them. I had the Flex. I had all that deal. But the most memorable Hogan one for me was the one where his arm, went back and did the deal and stuff like that. I had Beefcake. I had a ton of different stuff. but yeah, I don't ever remember there being a time where I wasn't surrounded by something wrestling in my earliest childhood. And like I said, I don't remember anything obviously from the time I was born up till the time I was about 2 years old. I just have no recollection of that. Too is when my memory starts kicking in. And I think the thing is too, I do remember certain things, but there's a lot of photographs and videos that I guess I've visually seen, and I'm like, oh cool, I had this, I had that. I had every single WWF wrestling buddy possible. Of course, I played with like Hogan, Warrior, and Savage all the time and wrestled around in my living room, you know, jumping off the couch, elbow dropping the wrestling buddies and that kind of stuff. Crazy. Sorry, the Baltimore Ravens game is on right now, and Miami is 14 and the Ravens are 28, and it's 4 minutes 5 seconds in the third quarter. So let's go Baltimore. Anyway, it was a crazy time back then. As far as like watching wrestling and stuff like that goes, I was really, really into it when I was younger. And I think my grandparents were like super awesome because my mom kind of didn't really want me to have anything to do with wrestling. And it's not anything personal, but I think most mothers just don't like want their kids watching such, you know, violence and this and that and whatever else. So it's kind of crazy because her and my dad had divorced. Of course, my dad was professional wrestler, WWF, WCW, ECW star, Bad Boy Barry Hardy. And it was, you know, it was just kind of like wrestling was kind of like something that she was, I mean, for years was trying to push me away from wrestling. Like, not actually becoming a pro wrestler. I mean, that came later in life, but I'm just saying, like, in general, like, why don't you play with these Star Trek figures or these G.I. Joes or this Hess truck or this or that instead of wrestlers? And I was just like obsessed, like, no, I just want wrestlers 24/7 all the time, like whatever. So some of my earliest memories of the stuff that like I cling to as far as like just some of my favorites, and I think it was because that's what I remember as wrestling as a kid. I remember one of my first memories being the Ultimate Warrior running down the aisle. It must have been like an episode of like something of like Superstars or something crazy like that, where like he was literally running down the aisleway and I was sitting on like my great grandfather's lap in the rocking chair. Like I said, I don't know, I can picture it in my mind, but I've never done the research to find out like what was the exact clip, and even then I don't actually know that I would know it. The first big pay-per-view to me that was like, whoa, memories forever was the 1992 SummerSlam, Wembley Stadium, Bret Hart and British Bulldog. Still to this day, that's one of my go-tos, but it was my go-to as a child. I had it on a VHS tape that was recorded, like the pay-per-view aired. My parents had recorded it on VHS tape or whatever. They did the same thing with the Royal Rumble that year from 1992 with Ric Flair winning and all that other kind of stuff. So that was some of my earlier stuff. Then later, I remember when I was like 4, we got WrestleMania 10, and I remember the Bret and Owen match just being like something that captivated me on that, like out of that whole entire pay-per-view. Everybody talks about Shawn and Razor in the ladder match, and I'm not saying that it's not good, but for me, the biggest thing was honestly for that pay-per-view was Bret versus Owen, and it was just great. Then later on in the year, which is weird because I never got to watch the Rumble that year to like know where the storyline was with the kick to the leg and all that other kind of stuff. It was only when I saw clips on the pay-per-views and stuff. But the SummerSlam pay-per-view, 1994, Bret versus Owen inside the cage for the belt. That was crazy too because I can actually remember ordering the pay-per-view and eating Domino's, who was the official sponsor of the pay-per-view at the time, having Domino's delivered to the house, watching the pay-per-view live as it was taking place, and once again having it recorded on VHS tape and watching it over and over and over again for years. But that weekend, there was somebody, I don't even know who, but somebody was dressed up, like I guess it was like an independent wrestler in the area, was dressed up as Doink the Clown at a Domino's Pizza. And they were like, it was like Axel Rotten before he was even like, I mean, he was wrestling in like Eastern Championship Wrestling at the time, but like ECW as far as like Extreme was not even really a thing at the time that, you know, Shane Douglas hadn't even thrown down the belt or any of that kind of crap yet. But Axel Rotten was a very popular wrestler in the Baltimore area who later on ended up becoming one of my trainers. But Axel and Doink the Clown were at this Domino's pizza, and they were like advertising and promoting SummerSlam and stuff like that. It was a crazy time to be alive back then, because it's like, why would Axl Rotten be promoting SummerSlam? But really, Axl was just trying to get himself over, and we all get it. So then, good Lord. So then basically, what ended up happening was, I don't know, I turned about 5-6 years old, and I was wondering for the longest time. I can remember going to like a Calidor or an Ames and getting a Giant Gonzalez and a Razor Ramon Hasbro figure. And there's certain like figures like that I always remember stories of, but then my memory, cuts out for a little bit. But I do remember when they released the Bendham figures, and I remember the British Bulldog was the first Bendham figure that I got, and I used to always take that and play with my Hasbros with that Bendham figure and stuff. And then it got to the point where they released the Superstars line. So of course my grandparents were really cool, and I was the apple of their eye, so they like spoiled the crap out of me and got me all of the Superstars figures. So I had Brett, Owen, Shawn, Taker, all that stuff, Ultimate Warrior, Vader, Razor, Diesel, like all that kind of crap when I was younger. So it was a really exciting time, and just good memories all around. I remember being about, I was born in 1990, so it's weird because even though I love, like, literally some of my favorite wrestling is, I always tell people, like, I watch from, like, 50s, like, I watch Bruno, I watch Vern Gagne, I watch Eddie Graham, I watch all these different people, all the way up to literally, like, probably about 1999, 2000-ish, maybe right after 2001, like, Invasion, Angle, stuff like that. After that, I like kind of didn't like want anything to do with wrestling for a while. But real quick to backtrack, I was 8-9 years old when everybody else in school was starting to watch wrestling. Goldberg was hot on WCW and Hogan, and in WWF you had The Rock and Steve Austin, and everybody was going nuts. I was like 8-9 years old at the time. But for years, I was obsessed with wrestling, and everybody around me was like, "Oh, why you watch that stupid stuff? And we don't like that, and blah, 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 and this and that." And I was like, it's like a die-hard, eat, breathe, sleep pro wrestling every single day. It got to the point where now it was cool to like wrestling, and I'm like, "Hey, like you can't like wrestling. I like wrestling. Like, what are you doing?" And just so many people. I remember girls in my class were like, "Oh my God, I love Billy Gunn," and I'm like, you don't even, like, do you know who Billy Gunn is? Do you know anything about Billy Gunn? Did you know that he was in a tag team called the Smoking Guns with Bart Gunn before he was, like, the badass and Suck It and stuff? And, like, it was just, like, a constant competition in my brain, like, because I thought these people, like, being punk rock and stuff, I thought these people were, like, posers, man. Like, they, like, didn't know anything about wrestling and, like, who they were before. It was only, like, the in thing, so 98, 99 kind of hurt my heart a little bit. The wrestling world was on fire. It was great. It did give me something to do, because then I guess a lot of people became wrestling fans, and I was talking to them about different wrestling stuff. But it was a tough time for me as a kid. I think the thing, too, is I can remember as a kid, my mom telling me, this is long before Google, long before the internet, long before any of that kind of stuff. I remember my mom telling me that, like, here's your dad's friend, Mark. And I'm like, Mark? Like, she's like, yeah, The Undertaker. His real name is Mark Calloway. And I remember going to school and, like, having fights with the kids where I was like, yeah, my dad's friends with The Undertaker. And they're like, oh, yeah, if your dad's friends with The Undertaker, then tell us his name. And I'm like, Mark Calloway. And they're like, no, it isn't. I'm like, okay, then what's his name? The Undertaker. Like it was crazy back then, and it was a very hard time as a child to have a dad that was a pro wrestler and that I didn't have a really strong relationship with at the time, and it was crazy to see like the kids were just so like blah. Of course, like I said, my relationship with my dad back then was watching him on TV every week and stuff, and like in the earlier days, it'd be Superstars and Raw and stuff like that. And then later on down the line, it would literally be like watching my dad on WCW Saturday Night and Worldwide and stuff. So it was just crazy because I couldn't relate to anybody in my school because they didn't have something like that going on in their life. So then the craziest thing was about right after the Invasion Angle, I was ECW obsessed. Like, I literally... In 97, I got Barely Legal as a fluke. My mom literally had said that my dad was going to be on a pay-per-view. She saw a commercial with him getting hit with a ladder, only to find out that it wasn't my dad. In that, my dad was wrestling for ECW at that exact same time. Like, he wrestled the Dudleys and Nova and Mikey Whipwreck and stuff like that. But the guy she saw in the commercial was the Sandman. So it was like she got the pay-per-view, and we were waiting to see if like my dad was coming out on this pay-per-view and stuff. And then at the very end, the Sandman comes out for the three-way dance, and she's like, "That's not your father. Like, what the hell? You know, like, I just spent whatever it was, like $20-something on the pay-per-view or whatever." And but I loved the show. I thought it was great. It introduced me to a bunch of new talent. I loved Lance Storm and Van Dam that night. I thought that the opening match with the Dudleys and the Eliminators was awesome. Like, I was hooked from day one. But once again, at that time, and like you see interviews and stuff like that all the time, I was about 7 years old, people literally would like freak out and be like, "Oh, that ECW stuff, that's real, man. Like, that's not like the WWF. Like, there's like tons of blood and this and that." So of course, once again, like my mom and my grandparents were like, "You shouldn't really be watching this stuff. Like, it's very violent and whatever else." And it got to the point where I was just hooked. And then like, I honestly think that after that first pay-per-view, my mom wouldn't let us get an ECW pay-per-view for like another 2 years after that. And then one night my brother begged her to get ECW Guilty as Charged from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, ECW 99. Guilty as Charged. Shane Douglas and Taz in the main event, and in the opening of the show, it was Paul Heyman coming on and doing that like amazing shoot promo from the backstage locker room where he talked about how Jerry Lynn had a cracked pelvis or something like that and all this other stuff, and how he wasn't going to bullshit the fans. And as a 9-year-old kid, I was freaking hooked, like where I was like, "Yo, he's giving it to him straight. Like, this is awesome. Like, what's going on?" So just ECW obsessed. When they first came out with ECW figures and Ames and all that other kind of stuff, I was like rushing right away. Like, Christmas 99 ruled. I got Van Dam, Sabu, Chris Candido, Taz, like all these other, like, the OSFTM ECW line is one of my favorites of all time. Super ECW mark right here, like big time. So it got to the point where I'd say like right after all the Invasion stuff started going on, you know, I was a huge ECW TNN guy for years, supported it every single Friday night and stuff like that. And I'd rather watch that than Raw or SmackDown or Nitro or any of that kind of stuff. And then when we found out that, you know, WCW was bought, I freaked out. Well, I remember watching that episode live on TV that night. And I was like running in telling my mom, like, "Vince McMahon just bought WCW, like, what is going on?" And then I do remember when ECW was purchased. And like I said, the Invasion angle and stuff made wrestling really fun to be a fan at that time. And I understood the importance of it in comparison to a lot of other people around me, because they just weren't following it like I was following it. And of course, my cousin was Chad Austin from ECW, so Chad was getting the Meltzer reports and all that other kind of stuff delivered to his house, and he was literally letting me like read that kind of stuff. He was letting me borrow VHS tapes. I swear he's got a bigger tape collection than anybody that I know in the history of my life. I used to call it Chad Busters because it reminded me of Blockbuster, and it was just that many wrestling VHS tapes. And if there was something I wanted, it was just literally like I went out and picked out 10 or 12 tapes. He let me borrow it for a week or two, and then I'd bring it back to him, and then I'd pick out another 10 or 12 tapes. And I mean, that's where I learned about FMW and all these different wrestling promotions, AAA, stuff that people weren't able to find out about because, like I said, Google and all that kind of stuff didn't even exist back then. So it got to the point where I think at that time, maybe if anything had really existed at the time, WWF.com was starting to do stuff at the time. So I was like, "Oh, cool," like whatever. I can remember the first time I ever really remember getting on the internet and checking that website was the holiday edition of Raw, where Triple H and Stephanie were like bossing everybody around, and they were wearing the Christmas hats and stuff like that. But it was such a crazy time to be a wrestling fan, and I think by the time I was, I don't know, 11, the Houston Astrodome WrestleMania 17 was kind of like the last give a crap for me for a while. And I think like a year later, 18, when Hogan and Rock, you know, had started doing their thing, I kind of started getting into it again. But really all I was doing at that time when I was tired of the current product was watched old stuff. Like, I didn't ever give up on wrestling. I just only would watch old stuff. Like, I wasn't watching current stuff. So it got to the point where for me, I was just like, yeah, like I was really into finding all these cool punk rock bands at the time and playing concerts and stuff like that, because I wanted to be a wrestler so bad. And we would do the, backyard wrestling on the trampoline, and we had all of our, like replica belts and stuff like that and everything. But it was like, and talk about replica belts, like at that time I think they were just starting to put like the replica belts in the wrestling, Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines for like Wrestling Superstore. They were plugging their like figure line with like all their old Legends figures, the bloody ones and the unbloody ones, and then they'd have like a couple replica belts. And of course, like me and all my friends were freaking out about like the ECW replicas that were coming out at the time, and they had kid size replicas too. So like a buddy in the neighborhood, like my family, I didn't get one, but like my friends did. I had all like the old foam belts. I had like the Winged Eagle foam belt, tag belt, stuff like that. I had the old AWA Remco belt that we used to use as our light heavyweight championship in our neighborhood and stuff like that. Like it was weird, but so crazy, because I think that for just like 2 or 3 years, like I said, I would only watch like old stuff on VHS tapes. I was still collecting figures at the time. I was still like into it, but I wasn't into the current product at that time. So I really feel like for like 2002-ish, I think it's fair to say. I don't know. My calendar's kind of messed up there too, because I do remember, like I say, I wasn't into it, but then I remember like going over to my aunt's house and watching the first ever Elimination Chamber at Survivor Series and stuff like that. So it was kind of like I wasn't following like TV religiously every week, but I was still like watching all the really important pay-per-views and stuff like that. But then like I kind of just was like kind of giving up on WWE at the time. Like they had just had the name change, everything like that, and I was kind of like, this is lame. And then there was really no other stuff to choose from. I mean, I was dabbling into like VHS tapes I'd find on clearance at like Suncoast or Sam Goody or Best Buy for like XPW and that kind of stuff. But I think by the time that 2003, yeah, maybe a year later. That's what I'm saying. The timeline's weird because I never really gave up on it. But I'd like to think in my mind that I did. But really in 2003, my grandparents started ordering me the NWA TNA pay-per-views for, I think it was like $9.99 or something on Wednesday nights. And that was crazy because so many of the wrestlers that I loved from ECW were popping up inside of NWA TNA. Julio De Niro was there. And, all these different guys that I used to watch on Friday nights on ECW were popping up in, TNA, NWA. So Shane Douglas, Raven, all that kind of stuff. So then I just fell in love with the TNA product, and I was a humongous fan of AJ Styles after I saw, I believe it was, I don't know if it was a ladder match or a 2 out of 3 falls match, one of the two, with him and D'Lo Brown. And it might have been both, I don't know. But I remember I had it on VHS tape because I taped it on pay-per-view, and then I would like replay it over and over again. And that's like pretty much how I really got interested in AJ Styles. And then after that, it just took off from there. And then I was really into like AJ Styles, Abyss, Jeff Jarrett, like Raven, like the whole first series of those Impact figures that they came out with. That was a perfect series to do because I was like, man, those are all the guys. And then from there, eventually TNA down the line would go on to get that deal with Spike. And from there, it just stemmed into this awesome thing where I was like, yeah, I'm a huge, TNA Impact fan, whatever. And just so much different stuff, like I said. But I feel like now we just fast forward through all that kind of stuff because those were my teenage years. I was 13, 14, 15 years old when that kind of stuff was happening. And then, of course, my wife and I had our first child when I was 15 years old. Well, I just turned 16. But, yeah, that was crazy, too. So I was into, like, girls and other stuff and not just wrestling at the time. Although, like I said, I don't think I ever really gave up on it. So then the thing was, by the time I had turned 18, before that, I was constantly, every single week, just dumping money into, like, wrestling t-shirts, wrestling replica belts, wrestling this, wrestling that, blah, 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 blah. Like, gotta buy diapers, but also gotta go to the store and buy this figure, this classic Legends figure that Jax is coming out with or whatever. And I was spending a lot of money on that kind of stuff, and my whole bedroom, my entire bedroom wall was still covered, and I'm like, thank God my wife, realized I was such a nerd and really loved all that kind of stuff because she never, like, once made fun of me about it or tried to make me feel weird about, like, the stuff I was collecting and everything like that. And she also knew that I really, like, really, really, really deep down wanted to be a pro wrestler, but that I just couldn't get a wrestling license until I was 18. So it got to the point where at that time when I turned 18, I was like, dude, I gotta become a pro wrestler. So of course, when I started my training and stuff, you know, they try to like beat the mark out of you and all this other stuff and everything. It was a really like messed up thing. It's like you're taught your whole life, like, you know, be a fan of wrestling, be a fan of wrestling, be a fan of wrestling. Then you want to get into the business, and then they teach you to not be a fan of wrestling. Like, if you want to be one of the boys, then you can't like ask the boys for autographs, and you can't this, and you can't that, and you can't blah 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 blah. Which to an extent is fine. Like, I'm cool with some of that old school stuff, but it was really bad. Like, they beat me up so bad, you know, when I first started in pro wrestling, that I didn't even want to go home and watch it. I forgot why I loved it for a bit. Like, it was bad. Eventually I was able to pull my love back into it, you know, but the thing was, over the years, especially recently now with YouTube and social media and Instagram and all that other kind of stuff, like really letting people know, like, hey, it's okay to be a wrestling fan and this and that and whatever. It's kind of like opened up a lot of different doors in the realm of like training to become a professional wrestler is way different than it was 13 years ago when I broke into the business even. So sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. It really just depends what side of the fence you sit on with it. But it's fun. That's what it makes it more than anything right now. It makes it fun for everybody involved that likes pro wrestling at all. I personally believe, in my own opinion, that a big boom for professional wrestling had happened in 2016, 2017, when Being the Elite and the Young Bucks and all that kind of stuff blew up. And I really think that that's what rejuvenated wrestling to be totally awesome, which is currently why all these years later we now have, you know, even though Ring of Honor, quote unquote, has been bought, it's still kind of gone, and Impact isn't what it once was and everything like that. But as far as WWE's main competition, it's AEW, and like I said, we really at the end of the day have the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega to thank for the reason that AEW is even in existence today, which is cool. But the thing is today I don't really keep up with the current product as much as I should. I try. I'm not gonna lie. WWE lost me for like almost a year. That sounds terrible to say. But when they signed Cody and had Cody at WrestleMania, I literally watched every single week just to see Cody. And the thing is, you know, it's bad when a wrestling promotion bases their entire episode around a Cody counter down in the bottom of the corner of the screen that was like X amount of minutes until Cody Rhodes is on and stuff. And it was like, yeah, because he's awesome. But realistically, when push comes to shove at the end of the day, you know, the AEW product really holds my interest. I love collecting the action figures and all that other kind of stuff and everything too. But a lot of the stuff that I watch nowadays, thank God for, you know, the WWE Network and stuff like that, because everything I watch really is old stuff. So do I love wrestling as much as I did when I was a kid? I think I love it even more now. I think I have a really bad love-hate relationship with wrestling, because I love wrestling and I love what it once stood for, but I hate the current product at times, as far as, you know, WWE is concerned. But I try to look at everything, you know, with an open mind and give everything a fair chance and stuff like that. And I think that at, you know, a certain point I will find something that I like. But that's the cool thing about all of this, is people can find what they like and what they don't like about it. And you can, you know, you can like the bad guys if you want, you can like the good guys if you want, baby faces, heels, since everybody wants to sound so cool and act like they're in the business nowadays and stuff like that. But it's just crazy. And so that's my story. That's a little bit of a backstory to some of the things that go off in my mind as soon as I see certain things, and things that remind me of awesome times and stuff like that. But man, I'm still heavy collecting action figures, collecting magazines, collecting everything, collecting all the stuff that I was not able to afford or have as a kid. I'm catching up and getting all of it now, and it feels really cool. It feels like I'm getting a part of my childhood back that was taken away. And sometime, you know, I got a book coming out called Wrestling with Life, Rockin' All Night, the Brian Hardy story. It's about my pro wrestling career, my music career, my personal life from age 2 up till now at 32. But when that comes out, you'll be able to see all these crazy stories about some of the stuff that went on in my childhood, and why I, you know, missed out on certain wrestling things that I really wanted to, you know, be around and a part of, and things like that. And I don't know. Either way, I'm happy with where I am today in my life, and I'm happy to know that I've been able to accomplish some of my dreams by wrestling on Raw, wrestling on SmackDown, wrestling people that I grew up playing with their action figures, Jerry the King Lawler, Brutus the Barber Beefcake, the list goes on and on and on, Hexall Jim Duggan. But I love wrestling. So that's all I can say. So until next time, guys, this is a pretty long episode, but it was a fun one. So until next time, this is Brian Hardy saying thanks for watching another episode of Brian's Wrestling Collection, and keep on slamming.